If there's one bit of economics that most people care about, it's how do you get a job? How is it that a firm would decide it's worthwhile to hire you as a worker? And ultimately, what we're talking about there is the demand by a company to decide to hire more workers. And that ultimately is going to depend, as is a lot of case with economics, about the marginal benefit of hiring a worker, MB, so the marginal benefit of hiring a worker compared to the marginal cost of hiring the worker. So first I want to talk about the demand part, which is really the marginal benefit. And let's break this up into parts. We'll be very concrete here. Let's imagine a shoe manufacturer, and they're thinking about whether or not to hire somebody. There are two parts of that decision. One is, what do I get if I hire the worker? And the other, marginal cost, is how much I have to pay for them. Well, let's think about the marginal benefit. This is where we're going to bring in a concept that we've used before, which is the marginal productivity of labor. This is the extra output, the number of shoes that can be produced if I hire one more worker. That's the marginal productivity of a new worker in the shoe industry. This is a certain number of shoes. The firm, though, wants to think about, well, what can I sell those extra shoes that I can now get because of hiring the worker? How do I get the value of that extra worker? I multiply how many extra shoes that I get by the price of the shoes. If the new worker can make 10 new shoes in an hour, and each shoe is worth 20 bucks, then that's how much that worker is worth. So the price of shoes multiplied times the marginal productivity of labor in shoes is the extra benefit you get from hiring the worker. So a firm is going to take a look at that on one side and say, okay, that's how much they're bringing in. And that is known as the value of the marginal product of labor. Okay, that's how much that extra marginal product is worth. You may see this sometimes as VMPL, the value of the marginal product of labor. So that's the benefit side. Now, if I'm a firm, I'm going to compare that to what I have to pay the worker. If the value of hiring the worker is, for example, less than the wage, I'm not going to hire them. I mean, in most cases, if you have to pay the worker more than they are bringing in to your firm, you say, no, thank you. If that value is greater than the wage, I'll say, bring them on in. So you have this relationship between the marginal benefit of hiring workers and the marginal cost. Now, if we have a competitive labor market where there are lots of firms that are competing for the workers, we would then have the wage equal to the value of marginal productivity of labor with a competitive labor market. Now let me be clear, and Professor Saranovic talked about this in another video. If you're the only firm in town, well, you might be able to get by with paying less than what workers are worth. Okay? And that's a whole other issue about, when there may be buying power by the firm for whatever reason, where they can pay less than that marginal benefit of the worker. But for now, let's just keep this equality in mind. Okay, so very, very important set of relationships here, and I'm going to strip this down so you can really have something to remember as you go forward. And just to give you a sense of this, when you talk about international trade and the impact of trade on workers, this is going to be a critical tool. So what we have here, again, is that the wage in general in a competitive labor market will be equal to the value of the marginal product of labor. And the way we depict that graphically is in the following way. Let's say that I increase the amount of labor going this direction. And for simplicity, let's say that the marginal productivity of labor is falling as you hire more workers everywhere. So for the first worker has extra output, the next worker, that marginal productivity starts to go down. Okay, what that means is that if we measure, this is the laborers or workers, increasing the laborers this way, and then what we have is the wage and the value of marginal product of labor measured along this axis. The first worker is worth this much, the second worker is worth that much, the third worker is worth that much, and so forth. The reason this value of marginal productivity of labor is declining is because we've got diminishing marginal productivity of labor. Okay, so that's an underlying assumption the way I've drawn this. If you had increasing marginal productivity of labor, you would draw this differently, but this is kind of the standard. Now let's imagine you've got some wage. That's the market wage. That's how much you have to pay every worker. Well, a firm will look at this first worker. This is how much the worker is worth. They only have to pay that amount. Say that first worker brought in $50 to the firm, and the wage was only $10 per worker. $10 per worker, but they're bringing in $50. We'll hire that worker. The second worker, say worth $48. They only had to pay $10. Hire that worker. They're going to continue on that process until you get to the amount of labor such that marginal benefit equal marginal cost. If I hire a worker out here, I'm paying $10, but they're only bringing in, say, $7. So I won't go beyond that. So here is a really important relationship that we will see again and again and again in various classes, which relates wage to the value of marginal productivity of labor. Again, I want to emphasize that this particular one is drawn with a competitive labor market. If you relax that, you can get different results, but that's the subject of a different set of lectures. I will say that you can also do this for the purchases of capital